Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to a new recent reads video and a new get ready with me style recent reads video, which means that I'm going to be doing my full face of makeup while talking about books that I have read recently and loved. If you don't know, recently when I've been doing these types of videos, I have only been talking about books that I've absolutely loved, just because I personally don't really feel like discussing books that I didn't absolutely adore. That's just me, that's just the current mood that I'm in. Maybe in the future that will change and I will want to talk about every single book that I read, but for now that's kind of the vibe. So if you are ever curious about every single book that I read and my thoughts on them, I do keep my Goodreads fairly updated. I definitely at least put a rating for every book that I read, and if you want to know my in-depth thoughts about anything, you can just DM me on Instagram. So without further ado, let's kind of get on into it. The vibe today is like full glam for fall. I am very inspired by my brand new Soft Glam palette by Anastasia Beverly Hills. I recently got a brand new one of these because my old palette that I got when this first released, I had used up a lot of the eyeshadows, and some of them had like cracked and broken, so I just got a brand new one. But basically today's eyeshadow look is going to be inspired by the shades Bronze and Mulberry to kind of match my shirt and just be full glam for fall, like I said. So first things first, I did put on some primers. The face primer that I've been using recently and I've been loving is the NYX Plump Right Back with electrolytes. It's a plumping serum and primer. This stuff is amazing. I am someone that thought that primers, especially face primers, were just a gimmick and that they don't really do anything. But I started using this, and I have to say, this is incredible because not only does it moisturize your skin, it also leaves your skin with a little bit of a tacky finish, just so that foundation can really grab onto it. And I just think that this is amazing. Makeup blends beautifully over it. It's just truly amazing. And then I also used the Milani eyeshadow base. I've been using that for years, and that is a really great eyeshadow primer. So let's actually get into some makeup. I am going to use the Wet n Wild Photo Focus foundation in the dewy finish in the shade Shell Ivory. So I have Belladonna by Adeline Grace propped up over here, and that is because that is the first book that I want to talk about. This is a book that has been so hyped up ever since it first came out. This, if you don't know, is a young adult, maybe new adult. I kind of think of this as like new adult just because of the age of the characters, but and just kind of how dark it is. But this is a historical, gothic, paranormal, fantasy romance story. There's a lot going on, and it's just all done so well. And I wish that I would have known what the vibe of this book was when people were hyping it up, because I just kind of assumed that this was going to be like high fantasy. And when it comes to high fantasy, I have to like really be in the mood to read that kind of story, because sometimes the world building is very complicated and I have to use a lot of brain power to really understand what's going on. And so I tend to procrastinate when it comes to reading high fantasy. But had I known that this is much more of a historical, gothic, paranormal book, I absolutely would have picked it up sooner than I did. So just know going into this that this is based in the real world. There's just paranormal and fantastical things going on as well. So this is about Signa. She is 19 years old, and death has basically followed her entire life, both literally and figuratively in a sense. But basically she's been passed around from family to family, and people just keep dying that are taking care of her. And so she ends up at, I think it's Thorn Manor towards the beginning of this book. And there's a lot of mysterious things going on. The reason why this is like a gothic story is that the manor itself is kind of creepy. It's kind of its own character. And then we have Death, who is an actual character. He's an actual being. I don't want to give too much away, but basically Signa and Death are kind of collaborating together because there is like a mysterious murder that happened with one of Cygna's family members in the past, and then one of her cousins also has a mysterious illness, so they're kind of teaming up to figure out what's going on. But there's also so much going on with their relationship and their romance. And what I didn't know going into this book is that there is a fairy tale called Death and the Maiden. I had never heard of this fairy tale before, but I had seen some people mention it when reviewing this book. So this is basically a romance between Cygna, who is a human. She's mortal as far as we know. She does have some interesting powers maybe. So I'm gonna go in with some concealer. I'm using the Camo Color Corrector by e.l.f. in the shade Peach. I find that this really helps me with color correcting my dark circles, and because my dark circles have more of a bluish tone to them, I use a peach corrector to help with that. Yeah, there is this interesting romance that is blooming between Cygna and Death. This is a story that just balances so many different things so well. I also thought that the writing was just absolutely beautiful and stunning. I found myself savoring this book while I was reading it. I didn't want to rush through it, you know. But yeah, I ended up really loving this. Had to give it 5 stars. By the way, shout out to Carrie from Booked for Romance, because she gifted me a physical copy of this book last December, so that tells you how long it's taken me to finally pick it up. And it came out last fall, I believe. But yes, thank you so much, Carrie, for gifting me this beautiful, stunning physical copy. So glad that I finally read this. I am definitely going to read the sequel soon. I actually have both the audiobook and the ebook on hold from my Libby app, which is the app that my library uses. All right, next we're moving on to concealer. I'm using the Tarte Shape Tape in the shade 205 Light Sand. This is a really wonderful full coverage concealer. I really want to try the Radiant formula, which is more of a dewy, you know, moisturizing formula. This is just the regular one, so it's a bit more matte. But anyways, let's move on. I read 2 novellas by Nicola Davidson this month that I really loved. First one is To Tame a Wicked Widow. This is book 2, I believe, in her Surrey Sexual Freedom Society series. That has a lot of alliteration now that I'm thinking about it. And this is a series that centers around this group of friends in, I believe this is the Regency era or sometime around there, like somewhere in the 1800s. And it's a group of friends that get together and they just talk about all things love and sex, and they just don't care if that's scandalous. They're just having a good time. So each novella is centered around each member and how they find their happily ever after. If you don't know, Nicola Davidson writes amazing erotic historical romances. I've really been enjoying this series. So this is book 2 in the series. We have Madeline and Ethan. This is a very interesting plot because Madeline, her husband recently passed away, and so now Ethan, who is our hero, has taken over that title, and both Madeline's family and Ethan's family are just scandalized by Madeline and the ways that she chooses to live her life, although she's not really that scandalous. I mean, she's just a widow, so she can live her life a bit more freely now. I'm sure she's had some lovers since her husband passed away or something, but anyways, like, her family is convinced that she is like a demon at this point, and she needs someone to control her, and she needs to get remarried. And so they try to get Ethan's help to get Madeline under control. Meanwhile, he meets Madeline and he is just immediately smitten with her. And so he's actually a virgin hero, which we love seeing that. And Madeline offers to give him some like sex lessons, give him a bit more experience, and then they end up falling for each other. And I just love this. These novellas are really short and sweet. They're like 75 pages. You'll absolutely fly through them. They're just a fun time. But I think Nicola Davidson does a really good job of balancing the romance with the erotic elements. These stories are not just about the sexual relationship between her characters. You truly get some really great romances when it comes to reading Nicola Davidson's books. So yeah, I would just highly recommend all of the books that I've read from her. And then I also went on to read book 3 in this series, which is an MMF romance. This is My Lord, Lady, and Gentleman. What's interesting is that I have already read this novella. I read it back in, I think, June, and I, for some reason, didn't really love it when I read it back in June. I think one of the reasons is that I had skipped To Tame a Wicked Widow. I had skipped book 2 and just went straight to this one, and I feel like that was definitely a bit of a detriment to my enjoyment, because book 2 gives a bit of context about Clayton, who's one of the heroes in this novella. And so had I had that context, I might have enjoyed, well, I know I would have enjoyed this novella more, because upon rereading it, I gave it 5 stars because I had read book 2. But this is about Clayton. He is an artist. He specifically does like boudoir paintings. So we have Susanna and Joseph. They are married. This is a marriage in trouble story with their relationship, which, if you want to know anything about me, just know that I adore the marriage in trouble trope. I live for it. And so Susanna, they're both unhappy in their marriage for sure. Joseph is hiding some things about his past, and he basically feels he's not good enough to be a father, whereas Susanna desperately wants children. And so, yeah, they're not communicating well. And so then Clayton comes into their life. Susanna commissions Clayton to paint a beautiful boudoir painting of her to hopefully spice up their marriage. But then Susanna and Joseph quickly realize that they both are smitten with Clayton and vice versa. This is just a really great poly romance. I definitely would recommend reading this series in order, like I said, because of how it affected my enjoyment of this one in particular. Next up, I want to bring up Thecortison Duchess by Joanna Shupe. So basically, I am working on reading the last few books that I have to read of Joanna Shupe's backlist, that I can do a complete ranking of all of Joanna Shupe's books. Like I did with Tessa Dare, I'll link that video up in the cards above. I have not read everything of Tessa Dare's, but I've read almost everything, so I felt comfortable doing that ranking. But with Joanna Shupe, I really wanted to make a point to try to read absolutely everything that she has written. So as far as I know, this is her first series, and this is the first book of that series. So I think this is her debut novel. And what's interesting is that this takes place in the Regency era in Europe, in London, though this book actually takes place a lot in Venice and then in London. That's just very interesting because, as we know, Joanna Shupe writes primarily in New York City during the Gilded Age, which is like the 1890s. So this is a very different setting for sure. This premise, I was definitely a bit hesitant going into this book because of it. So we have Nick and Julia. They got married a long time ago, I think like 8 years in the past before the book starts. Julia was just 16 and Nick was like in his early 20s or something. So immediately after they got married, he fled to Europe to go live his life because he was forced into marrying Julia. He did not want to marry her. Also, she was very young. Like I said, she was 16. Like, he definitely was not into this marriage at all. So he just left and has been living his life ever since. So now it's like 8 years later, and Julia is just sick and tired of waiting for Nick to come home to her because obviously he's never going to do so. Like I said, he was forced into this marriage. He hates his father, and he truly believes that Julia is just his father's pawn, and so he has no connection to her, and he's living his life. He absolutely is sleeping with other women, and that was one of the reasons why I was so hesitant going into this book, because I was like, ooh, I'm gonna hate this hero. I'm absolutely gonna hate him because he's just been living his life, sleeping with other women. But anyways, to give a bit more of the premise, Julia decides to enlist the help of this local courtesan who is very famous. She's amazing at what she does. And Julia decides to make herself up and pretend to be a courtesan, and she follows Nick to Venice, where her plan is to seduce him so that hopefully he will get her pregnant, so that she will have his heir for the dukedom. There's a lot of other things going on with like Nick's family members that are kind of running the dukedom right now because he's out of the country. And so she desperately needs to have his heir to kind of make her life better, basically. And so, yeah, there's a lot of deception going on in this book. This book is so messy. This is like the epitome of a messy romance. Like I said, I went into this book thinking that I was going to despise Nick, our hero, but given the circumstances of this marriage, like I talked about earlier, And just because of how Joanna Shupe wrote his character, I oddly enough couldn't help but root for him and feel for him. Like, I liked him a lot, even though, like, he's messy too and he's not perfect. But I don't know, Joanna Shupe was working some witchcraft when she wrote this book, and I couldn't help but root for him. I couldn't help but root for her, even though she's deceiving him too. Like, it's messy, it's angsty for sure, but I thought that it was just so well done and so entertaining because of how messy and dramatic it was. And I don't know, it just really worked for me. I loved how all the drama played out towards the end and how these two end up together and get their happily ever after. What can I say? I feel like I'm defending myself because I loved this book so much, and you shouldn't have to defend yourself for loving a book, but yeah, I understand that this book is not going to be for everyone, and that's totally fine. All right, let's move on to a book that I reread this month, and I think I loved this even more the second time around. This is Burn for Me by Ilona Andrews, as you can see. Recently, they actually came out with new covers for this series, and I really like them. So this is book 1 in the Hidden Legacy series by Ilona Andrews. Ilona Andrews is a husband and wife writing duo. They write urban fantasy romance novels, and this series is just incredible, and I'm so glad that I have started to reread the first 3 books of the series so then I can go into the newer books of the series. It has just reignited my love, no pun intended, Burn for Me. It has reignited my love for this series and for this author duo's writing. I am just obsessed. So this takes place in a world where there was this serum called the Osiris serum that was developed in the late 1800s. And because of this serum, there are now a ton of magic users in the world and throughout the generations of families. Now these magical families have a lot of power, both literally and figuratively. And so this series takes place in Houston. So think of this as an alternate universe Houston because of how prevalent these magic users are. But it is still a world very much like our own at the same time. So we have Nevada, our main character. She runs this private investigation firm. Basically, some years back, the firm was bought out. And so their parent company calls Nevada in and basically demands that she apprehends this man named Adam Pierce, who is what is known as a prime, which means he is the highest level of magic user. His magic in particular has to do with fire. And he is just wreaking havoc all over Houston. And so Nevada's boss basically tells her that she has to apprehend Adam and bring him in safely to his family. And she's like, what the hell? I can't do this. First, she tries to refuse because she knows that she's not near the level of magic user that Adam is. And she also just doesn't have the manpower to try to bring him in. But because of the contract that she signed when this company bought out her family's company, she has no choice but to accept this mission. Meanwhile, we have Connor Rogan, or Mad Rogan, as he is known. He is the hero of this series, and he comes into this whole situation for his own reasons, basically. And so him and Nevada basically end up teaming up to try to bring Adam in. And so the first 3 books of this series center around Nevada and Connor's romance, as well as other, magical plots. Basically, each book kind of centers around a different magical plot or villain or something like that. So first of all, something that I want to say, if you love Sarah J. Maas books and you have not read this series yet, what are you doing? Because Nevada and Rogan, now that I'm rereading the series, they totally give me vibes of Feyre and Reese and like Bryce and Hunt from Crescent City. They even give me slight vibes of like Aelin and Rowan. There is something about this couple that they just give me vibes of a Sarah J. Maas couple. But what I love about them even a little bit more than Sarah J. Maas's couples is that Nevada, our heroine, is not stupid and reckless. Like, she doesn't make stupid decisions. She actually listens to the people around her, and that is something that can't really be said about Sarah J. Maas's heroines. They kind of do their own thing and they get in bad situations, right? Whereas Nevada gets in bad situations, but it's not because she's stupid. Like, it's just that things happen to her, you know? But I just love her. I adore her as a main character, and I love Rogan. I love that he has just decided that he wants Nevada and he is going to do anything he can to have her. And in this first book, she is definitely resisting him, but also she can't help but start falling for him. I'm just obsessed with the writing of this series, of this first book in particular, because I just reread it. The action scenes are so well done. The romantic scenes are so well done. Like, you can feel the tension between Rogan and Nevada, and it's just incredible. So if you have not checked out this series yet, please do yourself a favor and do so ASAP, because it really is next level. I cannot wait to go on and read the next book of the series, which is White Hot. This is definitely on my October TBR. I cannot wait to continue rereading these books so that I can get to the newer books of the series. So I have one more book that I want to talk about, and then I'm just going to tell you guys a few books that I have on my October TBR. I didn't want to make a completely different, separate video about that, just because I want October to be kind of a mood reading heavy month, but I do have a few books that I would really like to get to. So the last book I want to talk about, it's over here. This is How to Walk Away by Catherine Center. Oh my goodness, I finally read this book. So this is a book that has been sitting on my shelves for like probably over 2 years at this point. And I've really been looking forward to reading it though, because I read Things You Save in a Fire by Catherine Center. That was my first book that I had read by that author a few years back, and I absolutely loved it. I think that Catherine Center writes amazing women's fiction books that also feature a romance with a happily ever after. I just love her books. I love the vibe. And so this one is about Margaret. The beginning of the book, she gets engaged to Chip, who is her longtime boyfriend, now fiance, like I said. And Chip is getting ready to get his pilot's license. And so to surprise Margaret on the night of their engagement, he decides to take Margaret on a flight with him, but he's not fully licensed yet. And so Margaret's very, very nervous, but also she just like hates flying. So she's just nervous for a lot of reasons. And that flight ends up going horribly wrong. They crash, and Margaret ends up having a lot of severe injuries. Meanwhile, Chip somehow leaves the scene like unscathed pretty much, which is just insane. So basically, she is paralyzed from, I think, like the thigh down or something at first, or maybe even like the hip down. And she has severe, severe burns that are described kind of in a lot of detail. So I will say that like there are aspects of this book that were hard to read because of the discussions of all of her injuries and things like that. So basically Margaret and Chip's relationship completely disintegrates for a lot of reasons. Mainly, Chip is just an asshole, like straight up the worst. And so yeah, their relationship ends. And meanwhile, Margaret is trying to heal. She's trying to recover from all of these insane injuries. And so her physical therapist ends up being this man named Ian, who is Scottish, and he's grumpy, he's broody. But over the course of time that Ian is working with Margaret, they do end up forming this romantic connection with each other. And I just adored this. I love Catherine Center's writing. I felt like I could so relate to Margaret, even though I've never gone through anything remotely close to what she has. But there's just something about how her character was written that you just can't help but relate to her and feel for her. And I just loved the romantic element with Ian, her physical trainer. Okay, eye makeup is all done. Let me quickly finish up my face and put on my lipstick, and I'll be right back. completed makeup look. I'll take off my glasses for a second so you can actually see it. I really like how this turned out. I am very, very happy with how this came out and how it matches the shirt that I'm wearing today. So yeah, that is it for the recent reads part of the video. Let me get into books that I want to read in October. First and foremost, I want to announce our October book pick for the Blush and Glue Stocking Society, which is a historical romance book club that I run with my really good friend Lisa from Remarkably Lisa. So in October, we are reading After Midnight by Teresa Medeiros, and look at this beautiful step back. This is a paranormal historical romance that I have read before and absolutely loved, so I wanted to reread it for this book club. Lisa is reading it for the first time, but I know that she is also a fan of Teresa Medeiros. So our live show for this book is going to be November 4th at 8 p.m. EST or Eastern Standard Time. We ended up canceling our live show for September, by the way, so if you didn't see that live show, it's not because you missed out on it, it's because it didn't happen, because both Lisa and I were incredibly busy in September. So we decided to hold off on reading that book. That was Dangerous by Minerva Spencer. I think we're gonna read that book in November. But anyways, this is our October pick. Like I said, the live show is November 4th at 8 p.m. EST. On my channel, basic synopsis, we have Caroline and her younger sister is set to get engaged to this Viscount named Adrian. But Adrian may or may not be a vampire, and Caroline is trying to figure out what is going on because she doesn't want her sister to get married to a vampire, you know? So I love this book so much, cannot wait to reread it for Blush and Glue Stocking Society. Also, I'm definitely planning on rereading the next two books in the Hidden Legacy series. As you can tell, I am obsessed with this series. And so White Hot is book 2, and then book 3 is Wildfire. And yes, I cannot wait to reread Nevada and Rogan's romance and to see what magical things ensue in these next books, because I honestly do not remember. It's been a long time since I read these books. Also, I have been working my way through rereading volume 3 of Saga so that I can jump into volume 4. I read volume 3 all the way back in January of this year, so I do not remember anything that happened in this volume, so that's why I'm rereading it, and then I'll jump into this one ASAP. I adore this comic series. If you don't know, this is an epic science fiction series that also has an amazing romantic element to it, so if you are a romance reader, you need to pick up this series for sure. And then I just have 2 more books that I would love to get to in October, one of them being Shattered Sea by Catherine Cowles. This is book 4 in her Tattered and Torn series. I adore this cover. This might be my favorite cover of the series. I love it. It is absolutely gorgeous. These are small town romantic suspense books, in case you don't know, and I've really been enjoying this series. Book 1 is still my favorite of the series so far. Then last but not least, we have Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. This is Isabel Cañas's second book, I believe. Her first book was The Hacienda, which I read a few months ago and really, really enjoyed. This sounds like it's a historical, gothic, paranormal book that takes place in the 1840s, and it centers around, yeah, this takes place in the 1840s in Mexico, and this centers around when the United States invaded Mexico in 1846. And it says vampires and vaqueros face off on the Texas-Mexico border in this supernatural Western from the author of The Hacienda. So very excited. There is a romantic element to this as well, just like there was a romantic element in The Hacienda that I really enjoyed. That was actually a priest romance in that book, and it was really good. So yeah, that is going to be it for this recent reads / October TBR video. Also, I want to announce, I already talked about this in my previous video, but we have another round of the Novellathon happening next week, actually, October 16th through the 22nd. This is a readathon that I co-host with Samantha, Ava, and Tiffany, where we just read all the novellas that we want. This one is specifically themed around Halloween and and, you know, paranormal romances. For those of you that really stuck around with me this entire time, I thank you so much. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to tell me about books that you've read recently that you really loved, or if you want to tell me about books that you're looking forward to reading for Halloween season, October, or for Novellathon. Just let me know. I would definitely love to have some discussions in the comments section. That's gonna be it for this video. I would love it if you would leave a like and subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.